Think for a moment. Imagine waking up every day knowing that a significant part of your frustration, exhaustion, and even self-sabotage doesn't come from lack of resources or opportunities, but from something much deeper. You're actively choosing complexity, choosing to work more, to have more, to impress more. Imagine realizing that many of your conflicts aren't caused by lack of options, but by something far more dangerous: self-sabotage disguised as ambition. Today we're going to explore an uncomfortable, provocative, and deeply liberating perspective. And I promise, the final insight of this journey will be the most important and powerful of all, capable of changing how you see your choices, your time, and yourself. Henry David Thoreau, one of the most penetrating philosophers on the nature of simplicity, didn't believe that complexity was just an accident. For him, it was a choice, a structural problem of the modern human condition, a force that conscious people need to learn to recognize, navigate, and above all, resist. This video isn't about renunciation or poverty. It's about self-preservation, clarity, and wisdom in a world that frequently rewards noise over depth and consumption over meaning. He observed something that remains painfully relevant today. Conscious people suffer more, not because they're weak, but because they see more clearly. They notice contradictions, hypocrisies, and absurdities that others pass by without noticing. While the shallow mind rests comfortably in simplistic explanations, the reflective mind struggles with complexity. This awareness becomes a burden when intelligence is forced to coexist with consumer culture that's loud, assertive, and socially validated. And here's what makes this even more brutal. He didn't just philosophize about it. He tested it. In 1845, he built a cabin with his own hands near Walden Pond in Massachusetts. 10 feet by 15 feet, less than most modern bedrooms. He lived there for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. Completely alone. No electricity, no running water, no Wi-Fi, no delivery. None of the comforts you consider indispensable to survive. And you know what he discovered? That he only needed to work 6 weeks a year to cover all his basic needs. 6 weeks. You work 50 and complain you don't have time left to live. The cabin cost exactly $28.12 to build. He documented every penny. He planted beans and sold the surplus. He ate simply. He worked only when necessary. He spent the rest of his time reading, thinking, observing nature, writing. He lived deliberately, as he said. And here's what bothers most. He wasn't running away from society. He was testing how much we really need to live well. He was calculating the real cost of freedom. And the answer he found destroys all our excuses. For him, complexity isn't simply a necessity of modern life. Necessity can be met with simplicity. Complexity, however, is resistant to correction. It's the inability or unwillingness to live deliberately, combined with emotional attachment to one's own possessions and status. That's why simplifying seems so difficult. People don't seek the essential, they seek validation. And when their possessions are questioned, they respond not with reason, but with aggression, mockery, or moral indignation. He made a brutal distinction between genuine needs and manufactured desires. Genuine needs are only 4: food so you don't starve to death, shelter so you don't freeze to death, adequate clothing, and clean water. Everything beyond that is desire, not necessity, desire. And here's where you sabotage yourself daily. You say you need that new car when the old one works perfectly. Need that bigger apartment when the current one serves you. Need those new clothes when your closet is full. Need that latest smartphone when yours does everything you actually use. Stop calling desires necessities. Be brutally honest with yourself. You want these things. You don't need them to survive. You want them to impress. Want them to feel adequate. Want them to fill an emotional void that no object will ever fill. And then you work years of your life to pay for these momentary desires you've already forgotten. Research shows that most people work their entire lives paying for luxuries they thought were necessities. And in the process, they trade the only thing truly valuable, lifetime. Think about how many times you've tried to explain something obvious, logical, or well-founded about living with less, only to be met with hostility or ridicule. Have you noticed how facts rarely change behaviors when pride is involved? The greatest danger of complexity lies in its normalization. A person who doubts their choices is generally harmless. A person convinced they need everything they possess becomes a source of financial and emotional chaos. Here's a question worth reflecting on. How many of your emotional wounds were caused not by bad people, but by you yourself accepting standards you didn't question? How many times did you lower your criteria, silence your thoughts, or doubt your ability to live simply just to keep peace with those who couldn't meet you at your level of consciousness? Society frequently empowers complexity because it's comfortable. Simple ideas are harder to accept than constant accumulation. Loud certainty is more attractive than silent doubt. This creates an environment where conscious people are pressured to conform, to simplify themselves, to stop asking uncomfortable questions. Over time, this leads to frustration, isolation, and a profound sense of alienation. However, he didn't advocate arrogance or open contempt. On the contrary, he proposed a strategy rooted in realism. The conscious person must learn discernment. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every truth needs to be spoken. Wisdom isn't in proving others wrong, but in protecting your inner peace and existential integrity. As you continue listening, you'll begin to see why reacting emotionally to complexity is one of the biggest mistakes conscious people make. Later, we'll discover why silence can be more powerful than argument, and why distance is often the most compassionate and intelligent answer of all. But before we get to that point, we first need to understand why complexity affects us so deeply and why it seems to multiply in modern society. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, who drains your energy more? Those who challenge you to grow, or those who pull you into a meaningless race? Write your thoughts in the comments. Your reflection might resonate with more people than you imagine. This is just the beginning. What comes next will reveal the psychological trap that conscious people fall into when dealing with self-sabotage, and how this philosophy can help you escape without losing your humanity. The real problem begins when conscious people assume that just living right can transform everyone around them. This belief isn't just naive, but dangerous. Consciousness naturally seeks coherence, logic, and dialogue. It assumes that if an idea is explained clearly enough, it will be understood and accepted. But this assumption collapses when confronted with ingrained self-sabotage. Not because the explanation is flawed, but because the listener doesn't have the internal framework necessary to receive it. Self-sabotage is deeply connected to will. Human beings aren't primarily rational creatures. They're driven by desires, fears, and emotional investments. Reason frequently serves these impulses instead of guiding them. A person who sabotages themselves isn't incapable of understanding facts. They're unwilling to let facts disturb their sense of certainty or self-importance. That's why logic seems threatening. It exposes limitations they refuse to acknowledge. This creates a psychological trap for conscious people. They keep explaining, clarifying, justifying, believing that persistence will eventually lead to understanding. Instead, they become exhausted, misunderstood, and sometimes even resentful. When reason confronts self-sabotage, it rarely illuminates. More often, it provokes hostility. The person who sabotages themselves feels attacked even when no attack was intended. Have you ever noticed how calm explanations are sometimes met with anger? How polite disagreement escalates to personal offense? This isn't accidental. When a person lacks depth, disagreement feels like humiliation. The conscious person becomes a mirror reflecting what the other can't bear to see. And mirrors are frequently broken. One of the biggest mistakes conscious individuals make is overestimating the rational capacity of others. This overestimation leads to disappointment. Disappointment transforms into bitterness. Bitterness slowly corrodes compassion. The tragedy isn't that self-sabotage exists, but that consciousness suffers by expecting too much from it. Another crucial insight: self-sabotage thrives in groups. Individually, a person who sabotages themselves may seem manageable, but when self-sabotage is socially reinforced, it becomes aggressive and self-centered. In crowds, people borrow confidence from each other. thought dissolves, emotion dominates. That's why mass movements, public outrage, and collective certainties frequently lack nuance or depth. Think about how many times popular opinions are repeated without reflection, how slogans replace arguments, how complexity is dismissed as weakness. This pattern was identified long before social media or modern mass culture. The majority is rarely wise, and truth is often solitary. This solitude is one of the hidden burdens of consciousness. But here's the subtle danger. When conscious people constantly confront self-sabotage, they risk becoming disdainful. They begin to see others not as different, but as inferior. Contempt poisons the mind of whoever holds it. It ties your emotional state to the behavior of others. It makes you reactive instead of sovereign. So what's the alternative? If arguing fails, if explaining drains you, and if contempt corrupts you, what's left? The answer is radical. Selective withdrawal. Not isolation from humanity, but conscious distance from unnecessary conflict. The conscious person must choose where to invest attention, energy, and speech. Silence, in this sense, isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's recognition that not every mind is reachable, and that your peace is worth more than proving a point. Wisdom frequently consists of saying less, not more. Observing instead of correcting. Understanding instead of persuading. Ask yourself honestly, how many arguments have you won but lost peace? How many times have you spoken truth and felt emptier afterward? These experiences aren't signs of failure, they're signs that consciousness must be guided by discernment, or it becomes self-destructive. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the practical stance that Thoreau believed conscious people must adopt to protect their mental health. We'll explore why emotional detachment isn't coldness, why compassion doesn't require engagement, and why choosing your battles isn't cowardice, but wisdom. If this perspective resonates with you, pause for a moment and reflect. In which situations would silence have served you better than explanation? Share your thoughts in the comments. At this point, we're invited to confront a difficult but liberating truth. The goal of consciousness isn't to correct the world, but to remain intact within it. Many conscious people exhaust themselves trying to elevate conversations, relationships, and environments that are fundamentally resistant to depth. This effort often comes from a hidden hope that being understood will bring relief. However, this hope, when misplaced, becomes a source of suffering. One of the most misunderstood ideas is emotional distance. Many assume this means becoming cold, indifferent, or detached from humanity. The opposite is true. Emotional distance isn't absence of feeling, but discipline of feeling wisely. It's the ability to care without intertwining your inner state with the limitations of others. People who sabotage themselves are often governed by impulses instead of reflection. They react instead of respond. When conscious people invest emotionally in such reactions, they surrender control of their peace. The mistake isn't engaging with others, but allowing their irrationality to dictate your emotional rhythm. Think carefully about this. When someone misunderstands you, mocks nuance, or distorts your words, what really hurts? Is it their opinion or your expectation that they should understand? Suffering often arises not from reality itself, but from the gap between reality and our expectations of it. Let's do brutal math here because numbers don't lie. You have 168 hours per week. That's an immutable fact. Now subtract 56 hours of necessary sleep. You're left with 112. Subtract 40 hours of work. You're left with 72. Subtract 14 hours of commuting, work preparation, inevitable basic tasks. You're left with 58 hours, 58 free hours per week, more than 8 hours per day, and you say you don't have time. Of those 58 hours, where do they go? Netflix consumes at least 10, social media another 15, purposeless internet browsing another 10, constant digital procrastination, infinite scrolling, random videos, news you forget in 2 hours. In the end, you waste 30 to 40 hours weekly on passive entertainment and digital distraction. Hours that could be used to read philosophy, observe nature, think deeply, create something meaningful, transform free time into meaningful life. You transform free time into digital void and then complain you don't have time left to live. This insight changes everything. If you no longer expect depth from shallow minds, their behavior loses power over you. You stop feeling personally attacked by what is impersonal. You stop trying to extract meaning from noise. This isn't resignation, it's clarity. The conscious mind requires silence to recalibrate. In solitude, you're no longer forced to translate your thoughts into simplified forms. You're no longer negotiating your consciousness to be socially acceptable. You have permission to think fully. A man can only be himself while he's alone. This doesn't mean rejecting society, but recognizing its limits. Society rewards conformity. It punishes depth that disturbs comfort. A conscious person who never withdraws risks becoming fragmented, constantly adapting to others until they forget their own voice. Another crucial aspect of dealing with self-sabotage is recognizing when not to explain yourself. Conscious people often feel compelled to justify their choices, values, and boundaries. This compulsion arises from a desire for harmony, but justification, when offered to those incapable of understanding, becomes self-betrayal. You don't owe clarity to those who distort you. You don't owe explanation to those who listen only to respond. Silence in these cases isn't avoidance, it's self-respect. Ask yourself something important. How many times have you explained your intentions to people who had already decided to misunderstand you? How much energy have you spent defending yourself against projections that were never about you? These moments are invitations to withdraw your energy, not to intensify your effort. There's also a warning about the subtle seduction of superiority. When consciousness recognizes self-sabotage, it can feel tempted to intellectually dominate it, to win arguments, to expose flaws, to feel elevated. This temptation is dangerous. It ties your identity to comparison. It keeps you psychologically dependent on those you claim to surpass. True superiority is independence. It's the ability to remain unshaken by provocation, to walk away without resentment, to observe without contempt. The conscious person doesn't need to announce their consciousness. It reveals itself through restraint. As we approach the final and most powerful insight, everything begins to converge. Silence, distance, solitude, and restraint aren't just defenses against self-sabotage. They're tools for preserving clarity in a world that constantly pulls toward distraction and emotional chaos. Before we move forward, reflect on this. Where in your life would fewer explanations and stronger boundaries bring peace? Write your thoughts in the comments and notice how many others share the same realization. At the deepest level of this philosophy lies an insight that many conscious people feel intuitively but rarely articulate clearly. The true danger of self-sabotage isn't that it surrounds you, but that it can slowly shape you if you're not vigilant. It tempts you to reaction, to constant explanation, to emotional entanglement. Over time, this corrodes your clarity, your patience, and eventually your joy. The final lesson isn't about others. It's about guarding your inner world. Inner peace is the highest form of consciousness. Not success, not recognition, not winning debates, but sovereignty over your own mind. A person who cannot be provoked, who cannot be dragged into meaningless conflict, who cannot be forced to explain themselves to those unwilling to understand, possesses a rare form of power. This power is invisible, but it's transformative. The conscious person must learn to recognize patterns. When you see that conversation never evolves, when the same misunderstandings repeat, when logic is met with emotion repeatedly, this isn't a challenge to overcome. It's a boundary to accept. Wisdom begins where futile effort ends. Most people seek comfort, not truth. They prefer beliefs that flatter them, not ideas that demand self-examination. Once you accept this, a profound shift occurs. You stop trying to awaken everyone. You stop feeling responsible for other people's intellectual growth. You stop confusing your clarity with a duty. This doesn't make you cruel. In fact, it allows compassion to arise naturally. When you understand that many people act from limitation rather than malice, resentment loosens its grip. Compassion, however, doesn't mean proximity. You can understand without engaging. You can wish well without participating. This is one of the most mature forms of wisdom. The most powerful realization is this: self-sabotage cannot be defeated through confrontation, but it can be rendered harmless through non-participation. When you stop feeding it with attention, emotion, and energy, it loses influence over you. Many conflicts survive only because conscious people keep trying to resolve what was never meant to be resolved. The conscious person must live selectively. Selective with conversations, selective with relationships, selective with emotional investment. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding deserves clarification. This selectivity isn't elitism, it's self-knowledge. Just as you wouldn't pour clean water into a broken vessel, you shouldn't pour clarity into a mind that can't contain it. Doing so only depletes you. And here we arrive at the question that destroys all excuses. Yes, Thoreau was privileged. Let's admit it completely. He had land borrowed from his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson. He had a Harvard education. He had a family with resources. His mother brought food sometimes. He wasn't in a condition of real poverty. He had a support network, security, options. All of this is absolutely true. And you use this as the perfect excuse to ignore the entire lesson. But here's the question you don't want to answer. What about you? What about you? You probably have more material privileges than 95% of humans who have ever lived. Think seriously about this. You have potable water coming out of the faucet whenever you turn it on. Medieval kings didn't have that. You have reliable electricity. Humanity lived without it for 100,000 years. You have internet, instant access to all accumulated human knowledge. You have a refrigerator preserving food. You have medicines for diseases that killed millions. You have transportation that takes you miles in minutes. You have education available in ways previous generations didn't even dream of. You objectively live better than nobles from 100 years ago. And what do you do with all these unimaginable privileges? You waste them. You buy junk you don't need. You spend hours scrolling on social media watching edited lives of strangers. You complain about everything. You eat too much. You move too little. You work at a job you hate to buy more things you don't use. You have privileges that Thoreau couldn't even imagine possible, and you use them to live in silent desperation, trapped in an endless race, impressing people who don't care. So stop using Thoreau's privilege as a convenient excuse. The question was never whether he was privileged. The question is, if you had less financial pressure tomorrow, would you use it to simplify your life or to accumulate more things? Answer with brutal honesty. The answer is accumulate more. It always is. People who get raises don't simplify. They increase their standard of living proportionally. They buy a bigger house, newer car, more clothes, more electronics, more everything. Privilege doesn't naturally lead to simplicity. It leads to more complexity, more consumption, more racing. Another profound insight emerges here. The more conscious you are, the more responsibility you have in relation to yourself. Not in relation to convincing others, but in relation to preserving your depth. A shallow environment can flatten even the sharpest mind if it's constantly exposed without protection. Most suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, but from how deeply we intertwine ourselves with what never should have mattered. When you learn to detach from meaningless disputes, your energy returns, your thinking sharpens, your emotional life stabilizes. Notice how peace changes your perception. You no longer see self-sabotage as an enemy. You see it as a condition, one that exists, one that persists, but one that no longer dictates your reactions. This shift is the true victory. So here are practical steps you can start today. You don't need to build a cabin in the forest or quit everything. Start where you are. First, do a brutal life inventory. List all expenses from the last 3 months. Mark what was genuinely essential for survival. You'll be shocked by how much you wasted on superfluities you've already forgotten. Identify one category of superfluous spending and eliminate it completely for 30 days. It could be delivery, impulse purchases, that subscription you don't use. Just one category. 30 days without. Observe how much you save and how you feel. Second, calculate how much your life costs in real time. Add up everything you need per month to cover only essentials: adequate basic housing, simple nutritious food, necessary transportation, basic health. Just that. Now see how much you work to pay for everything beyond that. You'll discover you work 3, 4, sometimes 5 months per year just to maintain an artificially inflated standard of living. There lies your real margin of freedom. Third, real and measurable digital detox. Delete one social media app for 30 days, just one, or use blocking apps that limit use to 20 minutes daily. You'll discover how much time you had but wasted daily. Use that recovered time for something that truly matters. Read that book that's been sitting there for months. Walk in the park without headphones. Call someone you love but never have time for. Fourth, define your personal enough. Not Thoreau's enough, not influencers enough. You're enough for your reality. How much do you really need to live well? Be brutally specific. Write the exact number. And whenever you're about to make a purchase or accept extra work, ask, does this bring me closer to my enough or farther from it? This simple question changes everything. Fifth, reserve sacred weekly free time for reconnection. Every week, minimum 2 hours. It could be a walk in the park, it could be sitting in a plaza observing, it could be reading in the public library. Something that doesn't cost money and takes you out of mental automated routine. No podcast, no music, no digital distraction. Just you and your thoughts. It'll be uncomfortable at first, then it'll be liberating. Sixth, one complete week experiment. Choose next week and live with less intentionally. Don't buy absolutely anything that isn't essential for survival. Nothing. Not coffee out, not snacks, not apps. Use rigorously what you already have. Cook what's in your fridge. Wear clothes you already own. For 7 days, prove to yourself that you can live with less. You'll discover that not only can you, but it's simpler than you imagined. Seventh, practice saying no progressively. Start small, but be consistent. Say no to one social commitment you were going to accept just out of obligation. Say no to that overtime that isn't really necessary. Say no to that impulse purchase. Each conscious no is a yes to something more important. Your time, your energy, your mental peace, your real life. Eighth, find an ally on this journey. Someone who also wants to consciously simplify. It could be a close friend, it could be a partner, it could be an online group of serious people. Having someone on this journey with you makes everything exponentially easier. You can exchange real experiences, support each other in the inevitable difficult moments, celebrate small significant victories together. Loneliness in change is unnecessary. Ask yourself this final question. What if your greatest strength wasn't your consciousness, but your ability to remain undisturbed? What if life mastery had less to do with control over others and more to do with control over your own attention? The message is clear. The wise person doesn't fight against the world as it is. They understand it, accept its limits, and choose their place within it carefully. They speak when speech has meaning. They remain silent when silence preserves dignity. They withdraw not from fear, but from clarity. If this perspective changed how you see your frustrations, your relationships, or yourself, share this realization in the comments. Your insight might help another person feel less alone in their experience. Remember this: consciousness isn't proven by how much you explain, but by how little you need to. Inner peace isn't found correcting the world, but refusing to let its noise live inside you. And that's the silent power that every conscious person must learn to cultivate. As this journey reaches its conclusion, we need to confront the most uncomfortable truth of all. You already knew all of this before this video began. You've already heard about living with less. You've already read about minimalism. You've already thought about simplifying. You've already felt that tightness in your chest when you looked at your credit card bill and realized how much you wasted. You already know. And that's exactly the problem. The title of this video isn't How Thoreau Lived Simply. It's how we sabotage our own lives by ignoring simplicity. Ignoring, not knowing. not being incapable, ignoring, consciously turning your back on something you know is true, and that's exactly what you do. Every single day. You see clothes in your closet with tags and buy more anyway. You know social media drains your energy and open it anyway. You calculate that you don't need the upgrade and buy it anyway. You read about living deliberately, agree with every word, feel that pang of recognition, and then close the video and do absolutely nothing different. This isn't ignorance. It's an active choice to ignore what you know to be true. Thoreau leaves us with a perspective that should haunt you. The tragedy isn't not knowing the way. The tragedy is knowing the way and actively choosing not to walk it. You know you work too much to buy things you don't need. You know you waste hours on digital distraction. You know constant comparison destroys you. You know excessive comfort weakens you. You know self-sabotage comes from your own choices. You know all this. And tomorrow you'll wake up and do exactly the same things. Why? Because simplicity demands something that complexity doesn't demand. Courage to be different. Courage to say no when everyone says yes. Courage to stop when everyone accelerates. Courage to have less when everyone wants more. And that courage scares more than anything else. So you ignore. But you ignore. You understand, but you ignore. You feel, but you ignore. And you call it not the right time, or my situation is different, or when I have more money. These are just elaborate ways to keep ignoring. Thoreau built his cabin and lived there for 2 years proving a point. It's possible. He wasn't asking you to imitate him exactly. He was showing you that simplicity is an available choice. And 170 years later, you're still finding excuses to ignore the lesson. Still saying it's different now. Still saying you can't. When the brutal truth is, you can. You just don't want to pay the price. The price isn't money. It's identity. It's giving up who you've built yourself to be through the things you possess, the status you maintain, the image you project. It's admitting that years were wasted chasing the wrong things. It's facing the emptiness you've been filling with consumption. It's discovering who you really are when you remove all the layers of possessions, achievements, and external validation. And that terrifies, so you ignore, consciously, deliberately. You ignore simplicity because embracing it would require confronting truths about yourself that you've spent years avoiding. Here's the final realization that Thoreau offers. Every day you choose to ignore simplicity is a day you choose self-sabotage. It's not an accident. It's not fate. It's not lack of option. It's choice. Your choice. Repeated daily until it becomes your life. You're building your prison brick by brick, purchase by purchase, empty commitment by empty commitment, distraction by distraction. And you know it, and you continue. But here's the liberating truth hidden within the brutal. If it's choice, it can be different. If you're actively ignoring simplicity, you can actively embrace it. Today. Now. Not next year. Not when conditions are perfect. Now. Thoreau's cabin isn't there anymore, but the lesson remains. You need much less than you think, and you have much more time than you admit, and you're much freer than you allow yourself to be. The final question is no longer, do you know this? You know. The question is, will you keep ignoring or will you finally act? Will you keep sabotaging your own life pretending you don't know what to do? Or will you stop ignoring the simplicity that's always been available and start living deliberately? Thoreau made his choice in 1845. You're making your choice now. Every minute that passes after this video is a choice. Ignore or embrace, sabotage or liberate, continue in the race or get out of it. And when you're at death's door looking back, the question won't be, why didn't anyone warn me? The question will be, why did I keep ignoring when I knew? You know you're wasting your life. You feel it every day. Thoreau showed you there's another way. I've shown you how to walk it. 8 practical steps. Nothing mystical, nothing impossible, just different choices. You have all the tools. You have all the knowledge. You have all the capacity. The only thing missing is to stop ignoring. So here's your moment of truth. Are you going to close this video, feel that pang of recognition, mentally agree with everything, and then tomorrow wake up and do exactly the same things? Or will you finally, for the first time, stop ignoring? Simplicity is here. It always has been. Thoreau showed you this 170 years ago. I'm showing you this now. The question is no longer how. The question is, will you stop pretending you don't know? If you made it this far and something changed, even slightly, subscribe to the channel. Leave your like, not for the numbers, but because if you felt this, you need constant reminders. You need something that pokes you when you start ignoring again. Because you will try to ignore. Your brain will offer 1,000 comfortable excuses, but now you know they're just ways to keep sabotaging. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you're about to ignore simplicity, you'll remember Thoreau, you'll remember this moment, and you'll choose differently. That's the only mastery that matters. Stop ignoring what you've always known to be true. If you've made it this far, this kind of reflection is probably already part of your path. That's why I created the Philosophical Forge, a training program with 10 video lessons designed to help you apply the philosophy developed by great thinkers to your personal and professional life and build a mind that is wiser, more rational, and less ruled by emotions. Start 2026 by transforming your life and investing in what truly matters. You. Check the first pinned comment and get your 10% discount coupon. See you in the next video.